So hi everyone, my name is Nastasia and I'm happy to welcome you on our webinar. Thank you for joining. Thank you all for your time. And today we have a joint webinar with our amazing partner and friend, Obsidian Digital, and we will talk about Klaviyo server-side tracking for Shopify. In just a few minutes, I will give a word to Juan from Obsidian Digital and then from Stape. Also, we have Alex and Vlad here. They will take care of all your questions in the Q&A. So what will happen today? We will introduce you the real-life example on Klaviyo server-side setup impact for e-commerce. Then we will have a live demo on how to do this setup actually for your Shopify store. And after that, we will jump directly to Klaviyo to cover two essential topics: how you can showcase the difference between client-side and server-side tracking, and how you can attribute revenue directly to server-side events and calculate their impact. And we will have a Q&A, live Q&A in the end, right? What you will get right after the webinar. Obsidian prepared a special offer for you, a free audit of your Klaviyo account. You will get all the details in the follow-up email in a few days after the webinar, because we need some time to prepare the webinar recording, to write your questions and answers in the blog post. Yeah, so you will get these details in the follow-up email. Also, of course, you will get the webinar recording and GTM templates for Klaviyo setup, actually what we will cover during this session. Okay, and just a few more words, few more slides about Stape, and we will jump to the best part. So what is Stape? Who is Stape? Stape is your all-in-one solution for server-side tracking. Firstly, we are a hosting provider to your server GTM container, but on top of that, we have plugins, templates, power-ups, everything to make your life easier, to make your tracking scripts more resistant to ITPs and dead blockers, to filter bot traffic, to prolong cookie lifetime, to measure the impact of server-side tracking with built-in analytics. We have all of this and much, much more. Marketeers and business owners and data tracking experts all over the world trust us. We empower and support agencies with our solutions and partner program. And with Stape, your data is safe and secure. And now I'm done with the really short intro part. And I'm happy to give a word to Juan for the best part. Please, Juan, the scene is yours. I'm start sharing my screen. Yes, and now, yes, enjoy.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my own screen now. Let's see. I'm just going to share the whole thing. And I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, Perfect. Yes, all good, all good.
Sweet, guys. Well, thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here. This is, it's amazing to be a part of this partnership because we are really happy to work together with Stape to solve some of our clients' biggest tracking issues. Just a little few words about Obsidian, the company I come from. We are around 300 plus employees, and that's across Germany, Denmark, and Finland. We started out in 2016 and really wanted to kind of dominate the performance marketing space in the Nordic region. And we've come quite far, and amongst other mentionable matters, we are Klaviyo Master Elite partner, which means that we are top 1% in the world of partners in terms of how many accounts we manage. And we're also super happy for our collaboration with Stape. Myself, I am an engagement partner, and that's just a really fancy word of saying I get to nerd a lot with these different product offerings that we have, and I get to tell other nerds what they should nerd about. And one of these nerdy things that I really like is tracking. And let's go deep dive into that already, because that's why you came. One of the things and one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar is, amongst others, we like to publish cases together with Stape. And that's because tracking is cool, but what's really cool is the impact that it does for our clients, the impact that it has when you activate the data that you're tracking and you're actually making it work for you in the third-party platforms. Let that be Meta, let that be LinkedIn, let that be Klaviyo in this specific case. And that's where we really see the need for good tracking, but also for partnerships that can really help you understand how to activate this data. One of the challenges we've had, and like with many clients, and specifically clients coming from Shopify, I'll tell you more about that in a second, but one of the challenges we have from people running email marketing on Klaviyo is that by default, the only events from Klaviyo that are server side, that means that they only accept if you're sending it from server to server. That is a completed order and a started checkout event, which means that everything on site, let that be a view product and add it to cart, a viewed collection, some of these other actions, they are by nature something that you put on your site as a JavaScript. And a JavaScript that is going to be a client-to-client tracking, or let's just call it client-side tracking, where client-side tracking, I think most of you guys know by now, is quite exposed to some of the changes that has been in the digital marketing sphere, with some of the things being that ad blockers, they're really good at blocking Google Tag Manager. And if they're blocking Google Tag Manager, they're blocking your Klaviyo tracking, they're blocking a bunch of things. We want to mitigate some of this, of course, respecting user privacy, but ad blockers being one of these things where we don't want to block the GTM. And if people say yes to consent to being tracked, then we still want to track them. The most important thing here is the actual browser restrictions. And here I'm specifically talking about Safari that chooses to really make, uh, let's say, our life a bit harder with the right, let's say, the right approach to privacy, but some of this kind of things that they do to pioneer themselves as a privacy browser can really become a bit tedious, even when you have consent from your users visiting your site. So one of these would be the limited cookie lifetime when you come from a known tracker. So what you see in point 2, the browser restrictions, that would be if I click on a Klaviyo email and the browser I'm opening that email with is a Safari browser, that's going to, let's say, that's going to understand that I'm coming from somewhere that I want to track, and that is going to make the cookies that I now place on the browser side be likely to only live for even just 24 hours. And a cookie that has a life expectancy of 24 hours is pretty annoying on a email marketing side of things, because our flows, our abandoned cart emails, and some other things kind of want there to be an identifier that lives for more than 24 hours. So that's why it makes super sense to change over to a server-side setup. And that just means sending some of these events to Klaviyo that you're probably right now sending client-side. We want to send them server-side to make sure we avoid some of the things we mentioned here. And amongst the other things that you see here is that, of course, changing some of your tracking from a client-side perspective to a server-side perspective leads to some further benefits, such as the limited control over what data you're sending over to third parties. So it's actually a safety regulation as well. And you also have some benefits, such as page load speed issues, if you kind of merge everything from the client having to load a bunch of scripts to trying to, let's say, allocate some to the server. I hope this kind of makes sense. And if you want to read about this case is actually published on the Stape site. And what's most important, it's not necessarily, again, what is in the big picture, but just really quick, we just changed the way that the tracking was going through Klaviyo, meaning it was a browser-side tracking, just relying on the JavaScript on the site, sending it directly to Klaviyo, to having a server-side Google Tag Manager set up in the middle, and that server-side tag being actually run and powered by Stape. And as mentioned before, Stape does not only make this hosting pretty seamless, because for anyone who's dealt with Google Cloud platforms and instances that you both have to upgrade, that you have to monitor in terms of if you're using enough, if you have enough compute, and a lot of other things can be quite tedious. Stape takes all of this work for you and actually gives you a pretty solid server hosting, as well as some power-ups that make tracking way easier. So one of the things that we believe is the most impactful is when we actually look at the data. And for this specific case, it was quite interesting to see that with some of the things we did server side, we could increase the viewed product metric by 91%. And that means there is double the amount of viewed products on the site that can be attributed back to an email because of the cookie that Klaviyo placed for some time ago was still alive. That means that if a user came back to the site, then Klaviyo was able to identify this email user as being someone who triggered a viewed product. And that's quite interesting because we use the viewed product as a metric to actually trigger some of our flows. Another even more interesting approach is that whenever someone's leaving things on the cart and they're not purchasing, one of the strongest things you can do with CRM and especially with Klaviyo is that you can create this add to cart abandoned flows. That means someone placed something on their cart, some time goes by, and then you choose to kind of get them into a flow to nurture them to, let's say, to complete their purchase. And this is some of the flows that basically make up around 80 to even 90% of the revenue that you can recapture through CRM when you've already managed for someone to do much of the work. And I think what you're going to see right now is just a quick demo from Stape of how the plugin works, I believe. And I leave you in really good hands. And after this, I'm just going to show you within a Klaviyo account how all of this kind of looks like and maybe answer some of the questions you might be having right now. So I'm just going to give the word back to Stape, and I hope that this was pretty clear from my end. And I'm happy to introduce Dan, who's a real nerd, and I really like nerds. So I'm just going to leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. Thanks for that intro. Lovely. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan, obviously. And, well, I'm going to show you how to set things up, the things that Juan just mentioned, meaning pretty much a couple of Klaviyo events in your GTM. Let me just grab the correct window real quick. Right. So our weapons of choice, as usual, will be our web GTM container and our server GTM container. I'm doing all of this on a test Shopify store that we run. This is called Ads Webinar. I'm going to open it shortly. And prior to the webinar, I've also hooked up the native Klaviyo integration here so that we receive some events when I'm browsing around. We will be looking at what the app actually sends, how those events look in the Klaviyo metrics, and we'll be pretty much replicating that for the sake of the next section of the webinar that Juan will take care of again. So let's just dive straight into it, right? I'm not going to dwell on how you add a data layer or how you install the containers on Shopify. We have covered this a lot of times in previous webinars and in a bunch of our articles. However, if you missed that, do not worry. Following the webinar, we will share the template of these both containers that I'm going to be using, so you can play with that. You can tweak it the way any way you want, and you will pretty much achieve the same situation. So, assuming we have some basics, this specific template was built for just Facebook. So we will be adding Klaviyo on top. You can see that on the server container, we have Facebook. So let's start from scratch. And the way I normally do it is I like folders. Like Juan said, we're nerds, so we want to organize things properly. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder called Klaviyo in my server container. Like this. And then the first thing I am creating here is I need an API key that we're going to use to authenticate and send those events from the server. So I'm going to be adding a variable, constant, because we're going to reuse that in a bunch of tags. So let's go ahead and call it const. Well, this is how I named them. Maybe a private key. The naming is arbitrary. You can do whatever. Now, where do we grab this value? You go to your Stape. You go to your Klaviyo account. Settings. In the account, you have API keys section. I already have mine, but you just click create private key. You can play with the scopes. Pretty much you need like events, maybe lists and some other stuff. But since, you know, this is a test shop, I just can do full access. So let's do demo. Let's create that. It will give you an opportunity to copy this. So let's do that and put it into our variable. Now our private key is ready and we can start creating some events. So let's first add a template. It's in the gallery. So I will find Klaviyo here, developed by Stape, of course. And let's add it to workspace. Okay, done. So next thing is we're doing the rudimentary active on-site event. Not much to tell here. So let's give it a name. I'm gonna call it KL for Klaviyo active on site. And I normally like to replicate in the name the actual event name that the tag is going to send. So they should match in my opinion. We're gonna give it that private key, which we just created. And since we need some identification for the user, we will give it a variable which holds our email address. I'm going to talk about it in a second when we switch to the web container. The trigger for this will be our page view. Simple as that. Sorry for the dog. Right. And what we also want to do probably, and this is of course subject to your regulations and such, but my advice would be to tick this checkbox, store email and cookies. The idea is acts as that identifier, among other things, which Juan mentioned. So if a user exposes his email anytime in the journey, and if you report it to Klaviyo, this tag will also set that email in a cookie so that consecutive events that user generates, even without being logged in or anything, will be stitched together, and and the events will be sent to the profile of the user in question. Now, since this is active on site, there's no other settings that we need to tweak here. We just fire it on page view. We give it the email address and the private key, and we can actually quickly showcase this. If I were to launch the preview of the server container with this tag created, and I were to do the same on the web and launch our test store, you will see in a second here the page view event, and our Klaviyo active on site has fired, and the event was delivered successfully to Klaviyo, which we can validate by going into my profile here. Let's find that real quick. Files. This is me. And I have just sent an active on-site event. This is the standard payload with the page. Again, obviously, we're talking about GTM environment. This means that you can mess with the data any way you like. If you have additional parameters that you want to send to Klaviyo, Klaviyo is cool that way. It digests pretty much everything. And you can then reference those data points in your flows, in your automations, whatever it is you're doing in Klaviyo, or that other stuff that Juan is going to show you later. So we are mostly interested in viewed product and add to cart events, right? Because like Juan said, rest of them are sent by the native integration from the server, so we don't really need to worry about those. So we're doing add to cart and viewed product. Now, again, we have all the dependencies on the web. So we have tags for view item and we have tags for add to cart that deliver information to our server. If I were, for instance, show you the data layer, here's the view item event here with a standard G for data layer spec. And if I were to add this to cart, we will have an add to cart event with the same sort of idea here. Now, let's do the following. Let's start creating those events. So I will pretty much copy this because I want to save some time. And this will be our viewed product. Now, this will become important later down the webinar, but we want to be replicating standard event names and standard event payloads, and that will make sense once I give you guys back to Juan. But for now, I'm going to send an event, so not active on site, but a specific event, and I want to say event name. Let's call it, I don't know, SGTM viewed product, for instance. Juan will correct me on the naming that he uses, but in principle, this doesn't change anything. So SGTM viewed product, let's do it like that. We'll still keep this checkbox here just in case, because we can. And we're going to change the trigger to a view item. Now, if I just leave it like this, we will send pretty much an empty event called viewed product without any sort of data. So we need to populate this a little bit. Our value for the event will be our value from our event data. This is the value that we have in our GE4 here. And there will be event properties, which we will need to fill in. Let's take a second there. When we get our events from the web, normally you're sending something like an items array or something similar, right? For the sake of GE4. I think I'm not doing it right now. So let's just go ahead and edit real quick. We go back to our web container. And in the tags that send those events to our servers, specifically view item and add to cart, I want to add this items array, which contains all of our product information so that we can then use it. So I'm going to just do that. We'll go to event data. We'll send it under the items key as usual. And we're going to reference the data layer variable e-commerce items. I mean, I expect everyone is familiar with that, but this is pretty much the root .notation route to e-commerce .items so that we can pick it up from the data layer. So I'm editing here to the view item event, and let's go ahead and edit to add to cart as well. Let's do items, and this is just standard G4 items. Again, obviously you may have you may be not on Shopify, you may be using other platforms, but the principle stands. If you just give it the G4 array, we can do the rest. Let's save that. Now, let me relaunch the web preview so that we can see that data actually flowing to the server, and then we'll deal with populating the product data in Klaviyo. Right. One sec. Here's our view item, for instance, and now in the event data, we have the items array, which pretty much has all of our product information. So at this point, you have two options, really. And again, I keep on alluding to what Juan is going to tell you next, but this is going to make sense in a second. Like I told you previously, Klaviyo can digest pretty much any custom parameter. So if you're lazy at this point, or maybe you're not the person who's going to take care of the flows on the Klaviyo, you can cheat a little bit, and you can just say, viewed product, let's do some event properties, and I'm just going to send my own items array, raw as it is, without any, we don't have a variable. Let's create one. One sec. We want to do event data here and reference it by the key, which we're sending. So just items like that. And now we're sending items. So let's just showcase that real quick. Relaunch the preview. And let's just refresh the page here. Give it some time. Here's our view item. And this is our view product event that has fired. And within it, there's our entire items array. Now, how does this look here on Klaviyo? This is our SGTM viewed product. And you can see the entire items array came in as is. I think it's a string in Klaviyo's world, so it's not really convenient. But, if you put enough effort, you could just deal with that. However, what we're looking for is something like this, something like the native integration is sending. So there's a breakdown with the specific keys and everything. Now, again, your events and your integrations in Klaviyo, be them done through just client-side JavaScript or maybe some integrations, maybe some third-party tools, may have a different sort of payload. Klaviyo has their own native specification for it, but even this sent by the application is not really matching their description in the documentation. So before doing the next step, which is we're going to replicate all of this, just check your events to see what you're doing. And the idea behind this is you want to replicate the payload of the standard events simply so that your flows are easier to do, because there's a lot of standard pre-built ones and they reference the normal, the standard parameters. And if you don't want to mess with that too much, we want to do it the same way this is doing it. So let's just do that. Now, we have all of this information in our items array. So our job here is just to break it down into the specific parameters that Klaviyo is showing us here, right? So let's do a couple just for example, and well, pretty much let's then do an add to cart. So we have product name, obviously we have product ID, apologies, fat fingers. We have, sorry, variant ID, we have variant name, image URL, and such. All of that, like I said, is available in our items array. So let's just go ahead and create a bunch of variables to pull that data. I'm going to be putting them in this event data folder. And again, to save some time, I'm going to copy an existing thing. And this is what we're going to do. Our items is an array. So we're going to say items. I'm going to say 0 because we're looking for the first object in the array here. You can see. And then we're just going to reference a key. So items.0.item ID, for instance, and I'm going to call the variable the same so that it's not confusing. And let's go ahead and do a couple more. So we also have our item name. And let's change it here. Let's see what else we got. We got product name ID. Let's do image URL, for instance. This is here, so we're gonna copy it. It just say image URL. Or is it URL? Sorry. It's capital URL. Okay. Of course, you can do any other parameters the same sort of way. Anything that you send from your web container to the server, you can pull and then ultimately send to Klaviyo. Now we have these variables, and what I'm going to do next is pretty much just populate the tag with this stuff. And we're gonna go to event properties, and instead of sending this items thing, we're gonna send the actual keys that Klaviyo is expecting. Let's take a peek at those once again. So it's product name, product ID, and image URL. Going to product name, product ID, and then image URL. Again, I have a bad memory, so image URL, product ID, product name with a space. Beautiful. Now let's give them the values and name, item, item ID, image, item. Oh, it's item URL. I'm not so smart. Okay, let me fix that. It's image URL like this, and it's the same name here. Okay, with that out of the way, if we relaunch the preview and just demo it again. Let's refresh our page here. Again, we got a view item event. Our Klaviyo tag has fired with all of the goodness we've put into it. So this time, looking at my profile, let's refresh it. You can see it already has like the product ID that we just put in, image URL, the value, which I put originally, product name and such. Obviously, we can do it for the rest of the parameters. I don't think you need like IP country, OS and everything. Not for these tasks we are talking about here, but some important things like quantity, maybe variant ID, variant name. Let's also do them just so that we have everything in place. And also there's brand, right? So again, we're just going to be looking at our items array and pulling the data that we need. So we have item brand, we have quantity, and let's say, I don't know, let's do item variant. So we're creating a bunch of variables again. Item variant, I'm gonna copy it. Item variant. Let's do quantity. It was brand, I think. Item brand. Yeah. Now we also have, okay, yeah. Now we can go back to the tag. Let's look here and just populate it with the needed keys. Like I said, the principle is the same for any parameter. So if you want something custom here, like my custom stuff, especially leave it here. Stuff for demo, right? It can be anything. And then let's do the actual keys. So we had brand, we had item variant, I think. Variant ID actually. Okay. Brand. We can also do price and quantity. Perfect. So variant ID, price, and quantity. For the price, we simply have our value because this is a view item event. So our value will pretty much be the same as the price on the item level. So we can just use value without creating new entities. For the brand, we already created this. Then we also have our item variant and obviously quantity. Right. Let's save this, showcase this. We can then switch to add to cart and pretty much I think we'll be done. Relaunching the preview. And let's refresh to trigger our view product again. And we'll look at this. This is our view product. It has fired. It has fired with all of the stuff we put into it. And of course, Klaviyo side, it looks like this. See all the same keys. There's value, there's quantity, there's price, there's variant ID. Most of the stuff you already like. I think most of the stuff you reference in your flows normally is already here. But then again, you can add whatever your soul desires. One thing we missed, I think, and that's probably important, is currency. So let's actually send that. And we can send it with this $sign. I think those are reserved keys in Klaviyo. So we can just use them like that. We do currency and just reference currency because that's in our event data already. Now we're done with viewed product. Switching to add to cart, we have an entirely same sort of approach. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to copy this tag, rename it. Let's do SGTM edit to cart. I think that's the correct event name. Let's copy this in the event name box. Here, our payload remains pretty much the same, right? We have seen what's going on in the existing add to cart, and we pretty much used it as a blueprint for our viewed product. So we're just going to reuse the same for add to cart, right? Again, I know I said it a lot of times, but before, jumping into this, check your existing events, check how they are presented in the metrics here in any of the profiles so that you can replicate the keys correctly, and then it will make your life easier once we switch to the flows, abandonment and such. So copy the tag, change the add to cart, change 0 other settings because we still need our private key. We still reference our email address. We still want to store that email address in a cookie. And we still pretty much want to give it all the same parameters. Since it's an add to cart, our expectation is we're always going to be adding a single product per event. So we don't need to mess with arrays or multiple products and such. We can just use the same payload. The last point here is to change the trigger to an add to cart. Save that. Relaunch the preview. And now we can deal with both events. So refresh. We'll see our view item as usual, but then if I add to cart, we're also going to have an add to cart event. Our Klaviyo tag has fired with all the payload. We can check it Klaviyo side here. And here's my SGTM added to cart. And you can see all the payload that we did. And funnily enough, the native integration is slow. Oh, this is it, I think. No, it haven't yet even processed that event. Might appear later, might not appear at all. So there you go. I mean, high level, this is it because we only need those 3 events in our case because we have native integrations. So we only took care of the active on site for first touch situations, add to cart, and a viewed product. Let's actually rename this, match what we're sending. we made sure that we're always storing the email and the cookies so it can be reused for further events. If there are any, you might have a bunch of custom ones, but this pretty much does the job. Again, I don't think that in this section I want to talk too much about the cookies or anything like that. If you have questions about how server-side tag acts in general, what sort of cookies it sets and such, please raise them in the Q&A. We're happy to answer those. And I think I'm switching back to Juan if there's no objections, because we're pretty much done. We did the thing. Again, to final words from my side, right? We will be sharing the entire template and the instructions and everything, so you will be able to replicate this entire situation in your Shopify store. We will tell you how to install the Stape application so that you have this data layer. We will give you the templates for both web and server containers so you can export them into your containers and deal with that. So fear not, and yeah, ask your questions. Juan, I'm giving the word back to you.
That was a super sweet demo. I think you really went through every single step pretty, let's say, straightforward for everyone to kind of see this again and maybe just by themselves be able to implement it right away. I think what I want to show now is the part where, yes, I think it's Klaviyo reporting. I'm not even going to go into full slideshow because I'm already going to shift to a Klaviyo account. And this is just one of our many Klaviyo accounts, and this is someone I know very well, so it's going to be okay that you see some numbers. But the thing is that I wanted to show an account where it's not an extreme account with a billion purchases every day, because then things can look a bit crazy and really good. But of course, if you only have 10 purchases a day or something like that, then it's more expectancy wise better to match it with an account that's not too extreme. So what I wanted to show you guys is that the cool thing about sending events on the server side level is that if you want to implement this today or tomorrow for your client or for yourself or whoever is going to be implementing this, is that you can do both implementations simultaneously without ruining one another. And what I mean by that is that there was a very good reason why Dan named the events something else than the exact name that they already have in Klaviyo. So we're not going to turn off any integration or nothing like that. As you can see here, I'm down in my reports part of things. So if you go to your Klaviyo account, and I bet you're a bit familiar with this, and then you can go to analytics, and then you have custom reports. Within those custom reports, I've created one here for you guys. And here, what I just wanted to showcase is that we're both still sending the, let's say, the native integration Klaviyo event that is just called edit to cart. And we're sending on top of that an added to cart SSGTM. And then again, you can name this whatever you want. What we want to see is that we just want to have it named a bit differently than the native one, so we can differentiate between the two. Same thing for viewed products. So what you're going to see here is just a totals sums, let's say, report. Of course, you can do this by number of unique users and a lot of other things, but I think this gives you guys a pretty good idea. So here is based on, I think it's last week, something like that time frame. And what you can already see here is that there's a pretty relevant lift in the number just of processed events from the server compared to the client. I think what Dan unintentionally also showed you is that when you're dealing with this native integrations and with the native way that add to cart gets served on the web client. So if it was Shopify, this would be through their Shopify app, or if you've done it manually. If it's WordPress, then you've probably done it through the plugin or manually. But whichever, the thing is that this takes quite some time to process. So when you're doing that live demo, you'd see that there was almost none of these kind of native events. And instead, you could really see the live feed of how this server events were coming in. And I think this is one of the most important parts, the whole debugging part of it, to be sure that whether you're identifying a user in a specific case or anything like that, being able to have this server preview mode really helps with actually understanding if your Klaviyo properties are being filled in correctly. So this is just a quick way to show you guys that it's possible to send both events from the normal integration and just put server side on top of that. So this can run simultaneously, and it's not going to ruin any of the flows that are already existing. It's not going to ruin anything in the Klaviyo account. It's just going to put some events on top, hence the naming convention. And as you can see here, it does make the time worth it. And the next most important things I want to show you is that, well, all that sounds really fancy and good, that you're getting more events, that sounds fine, but how does that play out in a real life to a day-to-day case? And that would be if you look at your Klaviyo flows, right? So you'll have a bunch of different flows, and that ranges from browse abandonment flows to abandoned checkout. You can have a bunch of different flows, but these flows are triggered by an event. And in this case, if it was an abandoned checkout event, that would be on a checkout event. If it was a viewed product, that would be on a viewed product event, and so forth and so forth. What I think is really interesting to see is that, let's just take something like abandoned browse abandonment, because this one is really, really cool to see. So what you see here is that you see two identical flows. These two flows, basically this flow is the original flow that has always run through the account, meaning with the old integration. And this flow is the flow that was created as a duplicate of this flow, but it doesn't fire on viewed product. It only fires on viewed product SSGTM. And with that, every single attribution of euros coming through this flow is only possible because we are, let's say, identifying more events that are actually triggering this flow. And that for me just makes it complete no-brainer. So what you can see is that this SSGTM events, and we'll have a bunch of more here, but whenever there is a revenue attached to them, all of this revenue had not been possible without the server-side integration. So it's really clear to see in, let's say, in dollars, in euros, in crowns, in whatever currency you want to see, that the server-side implementation is definitely worth it, because you can put a metric, a number, a currency behind it, and you can show the rest of your teams, maybe your inside email marketing team or your manager or whoever, that this is actually generating more revenue after we switch over to server side. So it's not all just this technical side of things and about cookies and all of those things. It's extra revenue coming in because you're able to send more emails, because these emails are triggering these events. So one thing to keep in mind is, if you do take this approach, so let's say for the browse abandonment kind of thing, what you need to keep in mind is that, let's say for this flow, you want to make sure that you're filtering accordingly. So what we want to do is make sure that we do not, let's say, we do not re subscribe people onto this flow. Sorry, I just sometimes I get nervous in these situations where I'm showing something live. But yeah, what you'll see here is that we've placed a bunch of filters to make sure that the only reason of why people can enter this flow is because it's only a viewed product SSGTM that has triggered, and we've excluded any other kind of event, and that would be a viewed product that would have else been a part of the trigger if I did not think about it. So we're actually isolating every email that has basically not triggered a viewed product. So that's why they're not on the other flow, but has only done it because the server-side setup allowed it to basically be visible. Another part of why it was interesting to, I think, follow up on how the properties are named is because down to your emails, what you'll see is that inside the email, you might reference a specific parameter of the metric. So if the metric here wanted to show pictures of your products in the email, and it's a variable that calls upon a parameter found in the metric, if you do not name this accordingly, or if you don't think about adding this as parameters, then your emails, if it's a copy of the original flow, will suddenly be missing images, or be missing products or product names or prices. So this is something to really have in mind when you're kind of doing this this implementation. this is basically it for me. And what you want to do is that you want to start with some of the flows that makes most sense. So for us, it would be you have a browse abandoned flow. You want to have a checkout abandonment flow. You want to have an add to cart abandonment flow. You want to have the flows that you would normally have within your Klaviyo setups. That is, if of course you're doing the best possible you can to retrieve some of these people that have said, I want to purchase from you, but just haven't gotten to do so. And you want to replicate this on a server side level. So we get way more people to actually receive some of these emails. These people have already, let's say, said yes to your email marketing. So they're not just suddenly getting new emails from out of nowhere. They are basically being targeted because they've said yes to receiving your marketing permission. So you're just sending more emails because you're able to see whenever they added something to a cart or whenever they viewed a product, and that's try to kind of circumventing some of the issues that would have happened if it only was a client-side implementation. And again, I say client-side and server-side. There are many things that you could discuss about this specific integration when we use Google Tag Manager, because you can use Google Tag Manager to be the trigger, but you could as well just do this as an HTTP call. It could be a post request from a database, from a credit card provider, from a third-party ticketing platform that sends this request server side, and then you actually have a real server to server connection and not a server to or client to GTM to server. And that could be even more powerful. And that's some of the things we play around with. Another thing is that we mentioned the importance of having the email being able to be found in the cookies. And that's because whenever I visit a site, we want to understand if that user, by some reason, has already given us their email and be able to tie this to a trigger, to something inside of Klaviyo. And what we want to do really is that we want to have the best possible ways of doing that. And something that Stape didn't mention, but that's really interesting, is that they offer something called a Stape store, which is this NoSQL database thing that you can also use to retrieve emails, even whenever they're not available on that specific browsing section that the user has. So even though you've set on Google Tag Manager to save the emails as cookies, then what you really want to have is that you want to have the best possible way of identifying the people doing these actions by providing the email. Let it be by doing a lookup on a database, or by sending it directly with the event, or using the active on-site event that's actually capturing inside the cookie the email if it was provided during that session. So again, many ways of how to retrieve an email. I think the Google Tag Manager for you guys is going to make so much sense when you import it and you actually start playing around with it. Just to say that this implementation, all of this, it's actually creating revenue by creating new email people that are getting emails that are actually then going to buy on your shop, and that according to your Klaviyo settings, depending on the attribution period, are then being, let's say, added to this what revenue is created. And depending on how hardcore you want your attribution to be, you can decide whether it's going to be based on someone who just opened an email, or if they have to click on an email for that to attribute it back to Klaviyo. But regardless, I think it's just a no-brainer, really a no-brainer to start doing this, because the value, it's going to pay itself. Even if you're paying for server hosting just for this, if you get help to implement it, the more emails you send and the more time has passed, this is going to be one of those 8 wonders kind of things where you get a compound interest on a setup that's already there. And if you want to simplify things, if you don't want to have two flows running at the same time, after some time has passed, you can choose to consolidate this and only run a server-side setup. But for most, we would definitely advise to have this two simultaneously running to be able to kind of showcase the extra added value from this server-side setups. And and I think that for me, it kind of sums it up. I really hope that it did kind of fill in these two parts of the presentation. And of course, I think that it's going to be mentioned by, I don't know if it's Dan or who it's going to mention it, but if you guys want to have just a free audit of your Klaviyo account to see if you're running the right flows, what you can do in terms of server-side tracking or anything else, just send me an email and I'll make sure to make that happen. And I think some details will come with the follow-up email. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you to Dan. Thank you to Natasha. Thank you to Stape for our collaboration. And I think that's just it from me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Dan, for this amazing session. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I see one question in the Q&A. Dan is typing the answer. And yes, if you have more questions, please feel free. In a few days, we will send. Oh, yes, I see more questions. Okay. Great.
Yeah,
Then
I'm
what?
answering those. No worries. I'm answering those. All good.
Okay. Okay.
I can also help for some of them if you guys need me to chip in. I love to answer.
Then what do you think?
Oh, if you want to answer them live, yeah, sure, go ahead. Like, there's a question like double active on site, so you go.
Yes, so for the double active on site, you usually wouldn't use that parameter for much inside of Klaviyo. So you cannot name active on site two different things. It's a very it's fixed by Klaviyo. So active on site is much kind of like if it was a Facebook pixel, the view page, the init call. So basically here, yes, you would have two actions and there's no way to deduplicate them. What we do is that we add a parameter with a unique ID and then we can remove that on the flow. So just like you would using Facebook pixel, just add a parameter, use unique event ID or something to kind of whatever you choose to do. And that's the way you'd be able to deduplicate that event. I hope that helps. Sorry.
Right, and just to add there, most of the time, yeah, you would have double the event, but that doesn't really hurt you anyhow because that's not normally an event you reference anywhere. It's just, like Juan said, it's pretty much an init call. So, yep.
Yeah, and even if you had a flow, it's still the same email. It's not going to add a new email doing a new event. It's just the same email that's going to have probably two active on sites, and that active on site gets batched in some weird way. So you wouldn't even be able to see the active on site right after each other. So in practical reasons, it's not even a problem.